Hello and welcome to Economic Forum, where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe. These can be issues to do with mining, with engineering, with agriculture, tourism, and many other aspects of life. We bring them here and discuss them to see how they impact the economy. My name is John Masugu. And today we are going to be talking about a very important topic nowadays, which is the issue of mental health. How does it affect business? Picture a situation where an entrepreneur suddenly is not well mentally, and how does that affect their business? Even a worker is not well and gets impacted with regards to their work. And to discuss all those issues, we have invited Dr. Mazhandu, who is a psychiatrist, and she's going to be talking about her experience in dealing with the workplace and mental health. Welcome to Economic Forum, Dr.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. When we talk about mental health, people don't quite understand how far it stretches. So if you could just give us a general definition of what mental health is all about.
Mental health at its core is being able to function in whatever capacity or role that you have. So if you're a child, you should be able to go to school and learn and go to the next level. Equally, if you're an adult, you should be able to be productive and function in the space of your work, function in the space of being a partner, function in the space of whether you have children. So it's your ability to contribute to yourself and to society. That is good mental health.
So I was talking about being mentally well and not well.
Okay.
How do those manifest?
It manifests in many different ways. There are many different mental illnesses. I'll just give you maybe the big, more common ones. So there's anxiety, there's depression, there's alcohol and substance use disorder, which people call addiction commonly. There's also things like schizophrenia or bipolar affective disorder. So there are a lot in the spectrum of diseases. We also talk about diseases that mainly show in extremes of age. So things like autism with children or ADHD, learning disabilities. Equally with extremes of age with adults, there's dementia.
Let's look at the state of mental health in Zimbabwe with reference especially to business and the place of work.
In Zimbabwe, definitely with mental health in the workplace, the biggest things that we have or see are issues around burnout, where you're overwhelmed because of work-related stress. There's issues around depression, anxiety, and the big ticket items, alcohol use disorders and substance use disorders.
Let's look at that. It's quite an important area, especially when you're talking about it happening at the workplace, because we have the human resources department, which has to notice some of these things and also offer advice. What is it that has been picked out, which you also put across to the CEOs?
So we're saying, how does one's mental health impact the whole company? So when someone has a poor mental health from any of the variety of disorders I've mentioned, you find they have poor concentration. They make mistakes at work. You find you have poor decision making, of which when you're at work, you must make a decision. There's always a question, you must make a decision. You find there's things like absenteeism. If someone is not doing well and they keep calling in sick, or they don't even call in, they just don't appear at work. That's what we call absenteeism. Then there's things like presenteeism, where somebody comes to work, but because they have something at the back of their head, whether it's that they have a fight at home with their partner, or they are still hungover, or they have something else that's stressing them out, they are present, but they are not working. And that means they impact the company because other people have to do the work for them, or the company itself has less productivity. So the things I've mainly mentioned have been, I was supposed to say, at employee level. But you also find that if your boss, someone has a boss somewhere, we all have a boss. If your boss is not functioning and you're asking a question and they aren't able to support the company, that means that we're all in danger. Because any day the company may not produce well, need to do retrenchments. And it's all because our boss has anxiety or depression or any other disorder they are struggling with mentally.
Do companies actually have systems of actually detecting some of these things? Because otherwise people think all that we are talking about is normal. So after your talk or even before, are there systems to actually see that things are not going well?
I think it's safe to say that currently companies do not have the best systems. I think everybody has a system, but is it the most efficient and the best system, considering mental health has been on the increase globally and therefore also in Zimbabwe in recent years? So it means you must have more robust systems. I think the systems traditionally have relied on HR to support the mental health of staff, and equally they've relied on things like a staff clinic, depending on the organization's size, right? But unfortunately now you need to have a system that also allows for colleagues to be able to pick each other up. Right, so there must be better awareness, better training, so that I'm able to tell if the person that I work with is not producing as much as they should, and they should be supported in a more anonymous fashion, because it does still have a lot of stigma when it's put through all these other channels, because all of mental health is private and confidential.
So we may look well, we may be jovial and so forth, yet we have a mental health problem.
Yes, absolutely. Because with mental health issues, it's not like gumbo or somebody's leg where you can tell this is a broken leg. Everybody says that's a broken leg, that's a swollen leg. With mental health, you don't always tell that somebody is struggling, because you are not in their brain. And unfortunately, you may take time to see it.
That's Dr. Fungisai Mazhandu. She's a psychiatrist and talking to us about mental health, especially at workplaces, in businesses, starting from the home, how then it also affects your work or your school and other productive sectors. So join us in the second segment of Economic Forum. Welcome to the second segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing mental health and its impact on the workplace, businesses and so forth. And our guest to discuss all that is Dr. Fungisai Mazhandu, who is a psychiatrist. Now let's look at this economic impact. We look at the home, we look at the workplace, and then we look at the community in general. Maybe even, the overall societal level.
So the cost of mental health on a community is at different levels, like you've alluded to. So directly, just like any health cost, a person has to pay for them to be treated, right? So if somebody is sick with a mental health issue, going to the hospital, it's free for you to be treated, whether it's at Annex or at Salim Gabe Psychiatric Institution. So the cost then becomes on us as a whole, on taxpayers. Because for mental health, you don't pay. Then we look at the cost of the fact that most of the individuals who have mental health issues are in their productive ages. So the cost is that they are not going to work, they are not producing what they should be producing. Equally on their families, because if your father or your mother is sick with a mental health issue and they are no longer providing for you, that means that if you're a child, you need to be on welfare, or relatives are supposed to support you. So it does become a cost on the community. I think we've all seen a lot of patients with mental illnesses that are in the streets, that are rummaging, whether it's the bins or walking around. Taking care of those individuals, admitting them, treating them is also a cost on our economy. So I think it ends up impacting you whether you like it or not, whether you directly see it or not. It becomes a community issue.
Community issue, because at times it then points to the family that person you see walking around is actually from such a family, and it does affect the family psychologically.
It's a lot of stigma, a lot of guilt and blame, because until people fully understand that mental health is an illness just like any other illness, they look toward whether it's the parents, was this person raised well, or what's happening in the family. If it's a child, they look at the school even to say this school has this many people who have this issue. So I think it's something that needs a lot of awareness, so people understand the illness part and therefore approach it with a lot more sort of grace and efficiency of care.
Yes. Dr. Mazhandu, let's look at the workplace itself. You've started at community level.
Yes.
So let's look at the direct and indirect economic impact at the workplace itself.
Yes. The first, which is biggest, I'll say it's an impact. But if you don't have good mental health, you may never have been employed. So that's already a negative impact, because we're expecting you to join us. I'll speak to anxiety. So anxiety is a disorder of excessive fear that leads to dysfunction. So I always say it to students that I teach, and my cadres to say, if you are very afraid, sometimes you don't put your feet forward, right? So if you're afraid and you don't apply for a job, or if you are afraid and you don't perform well at the interview, or you choke like an athlete, you know, those athletes who are performing very well, then they just can't anymore. That's anxiety. So if that happens at a point in time in your career where you're supposed to be growing, you may never reach the heights you're supposed to reach. So that's absolutely a cost at an individual level. A cost at a company level is even if a person that you send for a conference or something like that is unable to present your company well, that's a cost for you as a company, right? So you find anxiety is a quiet killer for people who are employed or who are entrepreneurs, who are business owners, because if you don't have the edge to do what you're supposed to, you're not going to be able to achieve what you're supposed to. Then we speak about depression. If somebody is depressed, they have excessive low mood. So very sad. And it comes with insomnia, which is not sleeping, low energy, low productivity, poor concentration, more mistakes. So you find that when somebody is depressed, they can come to work and do just the basic amount, but they can't be innovative or show initiative and give you more. So that's definitely an impact on an individual and a company level.
So what is it that companies do in order to assist all employees to identify some of these problems with their fellow workers for the good of the company and themselves instead of stigmatization?
I think that the best thing is always prevention. Because when we talk about mental health and the risk factors, so the risk factors are things like inflation, whether it's marital discourse. A lot of the people we're discussing are people in some form of a union. So marital discourse, grief, right? All of those things are things that I think people need to understand from a mental health perspective. We cannot stop life from happening, but what we can do is be better prepared for it. So when you have a company or an organization, the best thing to do is to have awareness for your employees. They must know what mental health looks like. They must know that when they start struggling to sleep, they need to take better care of themselves in terms of self-care. You must also then have information that is available to HR, because HR will be the first point of care for individuals in an organization, right? So the individual must know what I must look out for if I'm not feeling well. But HR must also then know what to look at if I'm not performing well and how to approach it in a better manner to be like, you know, Fungi, you haven't been coming to work on time. There's something going on. What's wrong? As opposed to be punitive from the beginning. So I think HR can be capacitated, and once you give awareness to the individuals, it means I can better pick my own colleagues when they are struggling. So awareness is the very first step. The next step would be first aid. There's a first aid in physical health. I think we all know it. If there's an accident, airways, breathing, that sort of stuff.
There's even a kit.
Yes, exactly. So there is also first aid in mental health care, psychological first aid care. So this allows you to look, listen, and refer a person to somebody that can assist them, whether it's counseling services or psychologist services or psychiatric services.
Do you think many people in management are now fully conversant as to how they can break sad news or, you know, devastating news like, ladies and gentlemen, actually our mine is closing today at 4 p.m. and you don't have to come to work in the next so, you know, without actually shocking people and causing all these anxieties and depression and so forth?
I definitely think a lot of the companies here in Zimbabwe are beginning to be very aware about the sensitivity of those situations. There is a company here that actually employed occupational therapy services when they had to do mass retrenchments, and they found that compared to their previous retrenchments, it went better, whereby they employed occupational therapists. Those are also cadres in mental health. And what they did was, yes, we are retrenching. And then this person comes in, which is an occupational therapist, to say, how do you move forward now in your life? Do you need to redirect your career? How do you then pick up these resources? Even if you're giving mass packages, a lot of companies have seen that when you give people mass packages without their mental health being in a good space, they'll finish the package and forget you gave it to them.
That's Dr. Fungisai Mazhandu, who is a psychiatrist, and we are discussing mental health, how it impacts businesses as well as the general economic environment in Zimbabwe. So join us in the third and final segment of Economic Forum. We are now in the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing mental health, mental wellness, and not being well. It's very important that we're discussing both aspects, and our guest to be discussing that, who has already shared a lot of ideas, is Dr. Fungisai Simon Mazhandu, who is a psychiatrist. So, Dr. Mazhandu, we cannot discuss this issue without delving into drug and alcohol and substance abuse, which is very, very, common nowadays. How does it then, move on to impact our economy, our businesses, and so forth?
Drugs and alcohol is a very big topic. I would hasten just to mention what we mean by alcohol use disorder. Because with drugs are illegal, so any type of drug is drug abuse. But with alcohol, there are limits on to if you're going to drink with alcohol, what is the recommended amount and number of days. So when we talk about drugs and alcohol use disorder, drugs and alcohol use, unfortunately, generally are not sustainable. So there is an impact even financially in terms of the funding for drugs and alcohol. When we say someone is abusing substances, often we say they're spending maximum time in finding money to use for the resources. Then they spend time while being intoxicated from drugs and alcohol, then time in recovery. And you notice once you break up that time, there's no more time to be productive for anything else. You also find that when people abuse alcohol and drugs, they choose to spend all their resources on alcohol and drugs. So they take away their resources from whether it's their family or whether it's their responsibilities. You also find that when somebody takes drugs and alcohol, oftentimes, especially in the recovery phase or what we call a hangover, they're unable to be productive. So that's when people either bank work. I think we've all heard of people who bank work on Monday and Friday traditionally, or people who come to work on Monday and Friday and are already anxious to leave, or they are unable to be present because they are struggling physically from the effects of drug and alcohol. Most people have had, at this point in Zimbabwe, these are the statistics, whether it's in their direct family or indirect family, they've experienced somebody who's abusing drugs and alcohol. And they will know that at certain points, the people do then end up stealing. So that's a direct economic cost on all of us.
And this is not only young people.
Not only young people, yes. Because stealing, maybe for young people, people talk about chargers, cell phones within the household, stealing money from people's handbags, stealing cars and then crashing them. And I'll add gambling to this, because that's also within the addiction space. You find that they are now stealing from companies. They are now stealing from, whether they are tasked in a professional capacity to hold money, whether you're keeping petty cash or you're supposed to do a payment. You find that those payments are not being followed through. And then after that, there is the cost that they then do cost the whole community, taxpayers alike, in terms of recovery. Because currently the centers that we have for the treatment of drugs and alcohol are centers that, when they are government-based, that do not charge. So it means somebody out there is paying for their treatment.
But someone who will be bringing these drugs will be making money, getting rich, buying cars, houses, and so forth. How do you address that, when you are talking to society?
When you talk about drugs and alcohol, it is a community effort. It is about prevention at every level. It is about prevention. In fact, for us as health professionals, we are seeing the part where we are now treating. But in the beginning, it starts at parenting level to say, if it's children or adults, are they occupied? Do they have leisure activities that don't involve drugs and alcohol? Are there community centers that are functional where youth or children can go and be entertained? Because leisure is part of life. Leisure is necessary. But when there is not a robust leisure space, people then resort to drugs and alcohol. We are looking to say at school level, because that's where prevention should start. Because most people who start drugs and alcohol start at school level, right? But then we're saying, are there other sources that prevent it from becoming an addiction. These are looking at your community leaders, your religious leaders, your cultural leaders, because they are the ones who are with these people maximum time while they are growing up. Then you look at adult level, and it's saying in terms of men's spaces, are men supporting each other, are women supporting each other? Because some of these things that fuel drugs and alcohol abuse are marital discourse, unhappiness from other areas leads to an increase in drugs and alcohol use. So we have to view it as a whole community. And when people see that whole impact, they are then able to be more whistleblowers to say that house or that person is selling drugs and alcohol. Because the police cannot be everywhere, the doctors cannot be everywhere. And as is currently with the Drugs and Alcohol Task Force, we as practitioners do work with the police as well, because we find that the police are better able to pick when these things are already happening, and to make sure that when somebody is abusing drugs and alcohol, instead of going immediately to be arrested, they are given an opportunity to be rehabilitated so they can re-enter society and be better productive.
Well, it's important that you talk about rehabilitation and
Absolutely.
how you work with the police. But, when you look at mental health, there are levels where people will prefer the cultural way, the traditional way of solving the problem, and also the scientific way, and even the religious way. And do you now work together or consult each other in order to address some of these issues?
To have perfect mental health, right, one must be mind, body, and soul. So absolutely, we have to work together, because a person cannot be extracted from their culture or extracted from their religion while they receive scientific based health. I talk about in terms of a cultural space, one of the big issues or illnesses that you see around is postpartum depression. This is an illness that can occur to a mother who's just delivered a child, right? And you find already in our space culturally, there is something that safeguards for that support. Masungiro, culturally, your first child, you go to your maternal home and you are taught how to take care of this newborn by your mother, who we always assume is your trusted person, and you are supported. So when you look at that, I think culture has always had ways of also looking after mental health. Culture, strong family unit has always catered for that. So it's not about saying this or this or this is the best method. It's saying that taking into cognizance that we are an African traditional body, how are we making sure that a person is catered for with respect to their religion, to their culture, and definitely with health as well.
Well, Dr. Mazhandu, it has been nice that you have offered that advice as to how people can actually seek help when they discover that they've got mental health challenges, as well as also for companies to actually help in the rehabilitation of employees in such a way that they don't feel stigmatized. That's Dr. Fungisai Mazhandu, who has been our guest today, talking all issues to do with mental health, especially the way it impacts business and economic development. What remains is for me to invite you to call us when you've got issues, and we can get in touch with experts like Dr. Mazhandu here in order to explain some of these things. On the numbers that are on your screen, you can get in touch with us. If you would want to engage us, as well as the experts we bring, you can do so again on the social media platforms that are showing on the screen. If you have missed some of the episodes of Economic Forum, you can actually watch them on our YouTube channel, which is Economic Forum Zimbabwe. So on behalf of our expert today, psychiatrist Dr. Fungisai Simon Mazhandu, who has been talking all issues to do with mental health, this is John Masugu on behalf of the production crew wishing you happy viewing.